I am a humongous book fan. I started working in the book business actually for B. Dalton Booksellers back in suburban Chicago, Woodfield Mall, Thanksgiving 1987. But before then, I was a humongous reader. I probably started reading them books probably by the time I was probably about 14. I remember reading Jaws, and occasionally would try to read some of my brother's Star Trek books that they published in the 70s. But I remember that, so that probably was about 1975. So I would probably been about 13 or 14 when I first read that book, and where my love of reading really came in. And I have been reading ever since. My first year of high school, I spent a good portion of it reading, and I mostly Agatha Christie novels. Oddly enough, I spent a long time reading them, and I think I overdosed on mystery novels, and I very rarely read them now. But I just love reading. It's just a passion that I have. And when obviously I stayed in the book business. I worked for Borders from, B. Dalton's from 1987 until 1991. And then I was gone for about a year from the book business or so. And when I moved back in the early 90s, I moved up to San Francisco area. I spent about 2 years there, but I moved back to Chicago. So I started and I worked for Walden's for about a year or so, and then segued into working for Barbara's, which was a suburban independent chain, and that was probably about 93, and I worked from them from 93 until about 97, and just before I started working for Borders, and I segued into Borders in 97. Also during that time between Barbara's and Borders, I was working for a British-based company called Waterstones. And before they went out of business, so I spent a couple months working for them. Anyways, so then I spent the last 14 years working for Borders until they closed in September of 2011. So obviously I have this love of books, and I read a lot. I've read hundreds of books. And I buy more books than I'll actually ever read. And there was that quote by Lemony Snicket that I'll eventually end up being found dead next to a pile of books that I plan to read. But I adore the books for Latin, and I don't want a Kindle or any electronic thing. I think that's kind of cheating. But, I guess if I was a world traveler and did a lot of that, I could see having one of those electronic readers. But nothing replaces this. And so to me, as much as some people like to, like their music or movies or whatever, to me, books are the best thing on the planet, and I just love it. And the changing book business has, obviously made it a dinosaur, and more people, some people are reading less too, and what they're reading and what they are reading is just this popular fiction, and which I guess is not. I have really no issue with it. I just wish they sometimes occasionally read something else that would actually challenge them. It's like watching. Hey, let's watch 2.5 Men. It's a show. I turn my brain off and blah blah blah. But then why not try something like Parks and Recreation, which you need to, or Arrested Development, where you might have to go back a couple times to get the joke. But there's a lot of people who are just resistant to that type of reading, that they will wait until someone say, like on Oprah. Oprah did a great thing when she started that book club. The whole idea was to introduce literature to people. And while there's an argument between what constitutes literature and what constitutes popular fiction, and I'll never know what we'll get with that. But I think what Oprah tried to do was to open people's minds to the idea that there was something more beyond popular fiction. And so she did that. But the problem that I don't think she intentionally created, was people started waiting for her to make suggestions instead of doing what I think she planned, which was, hey, read this book. After you get done reading it, go back to the bookstore and ask the clerk that's working there what they're reading and what they can suggest beyond what I suggested. And unfortunately, I think what created that is people stopped doing that. They just waited for Oprah to tell them what to read. So they did. And so the book business started getting this, lost thing. And I think that's the problem right now, even with Barnes & Noble, being the last major brick and mortar out there, beyond some independence. I think part of it is that the reason why they're cutting hours and why the book sales are going up is because there's no more booksellers there anymore who can tell customers what to read. And that's a problem. If you go into the Barnes & Noble now, you really kind of, and if you don't know what you want to read, you want someone there who's an expert. Well, the problem is, at least my encounters with a few Barnes & Noble employees over the last couple of years, is that a lot of them, they're just there just to earn a couple bucks, and they love their James Patterson, and that's about it, and they really don't pay attention to what is actually in the store. And a lot of the big bestsellers, the ones that became movies and everything else, a lot of that started in the independents, because it was the independents that would push these unusual titles. And like Marley and Me, I guess is a good example. Marley and Me was one of, oddly enough, even though it was a well-known writer, the book had a push from the independents that eventually segued into the major chains. But it's just, that's what book business needs. And the more hours that they cut out of staff members to help the CEO maintain their paycheck, and so what they're doing is stealing away from the staff members who can hopefully tell customers what to buy beyond the New York Times bestseller list, which is a complete misnomer on top of it. It's not a barometer of what people are reading. It's telling you what book companies are buying in large quantities. It has nothing to do with what people are actually reading. So, I hate that idea. Is that then that everyone bases everything on the New York Times bestsellers, and it really isn't. It's just a title that the chains and independents are buying in mass quantities, and it's not necessarily what everyone is reading. And again, I call back to the idea that everyone should read what they want to read. It's just sometimes, once in a while, if you read popular fiction, if you read science fiction, you read mystery, you read romance, occasionally pick up something that is a little bit different, and test yourself, and try, and take a risk on something, and go to the Barnes & Noble or to your independents and say, hey, what are you reading, when you ask the clerk, and that clerk will tell you what he or she is reading. And from there, you can get a list of good stuff. And so I think that's really a great opportunity to save the book industry in a lot of ways, and get, so, yeah, sure, some people might actually still buy stuff on Amazon. That's fine. Or they might go to BarnesandNoble.com. That's fine. But what we need is that people, because we are a tactile people, we need to touch things. And we like, and when books are sometimes mysterious little creatures, and sometimes you need to have someone say, yeah, this is a good book. Maybe only, 1,000 people have read it, but it's a good book, and you should read it, so you can pass it on to someone else. That's how book clubs continue to grow, and how small titles continue to, again, for every mass produced James Patterson novel, which is never actually written by him, we have probably 6 or 7 books that don't get published, or they get passed over because the audience is unwilling to take the risk. And now publishers are unwilling to take the risk with new authors because they want. I understand it; they want to guarantee sales. But if you had employees who could read these books, and a good good cross section of them do. I mean, not in my store we had people who liked romance, we had people who liked science fiction, we had people who liked nonfiction and history and everything else. And so these work together to make a successful sale. And so at the end of the day, I encourage people to read. You know, okay, fine. You want to read James Patterson? You want to read Lincoln Child? You want to do, Charlene Harris? You want to do Nora Roberts? Fine. But I challenge you to pick up something that you don't quite know about, that you don't who the author is, and try. Because if you don't try, you don't know. And if you're real, and any readers out there concerned about the book business and how it's being affected by e-readers and companies focusing more on margins versus customer service, this is what we need to do. So.